My work rival collapsed in the hospital parking garage. I was the only one who saw it happen. Not a dramatic fall, just her knees giving out slowly. One hand catching the concrete pillar, the other pressed flat against her sternum like she was trying to hold something inside that had already decided to leave. I almost kept walking. We weren't friends. We were barely civil. My name is Ethan Calloway. I'm 32. For the past 3 years, I've worked as a senior clinical research coordinator at a mid-sized pharmaceutical research firm in Boston. And for all 3 of those years, the most consistent presence in my professional life, beside my direct supervisor in the coffee machine on the 4th floor that jams every Tuesday, has been Vivian Cho. Vivian was 2 years ahead of me in the department. She had gotten there first, established herself first, and made it very clear, without ever being rude enough to hand you a reason to complain, that she intended to stay ahead. She was precise, the way surgeons are precise. She caught errors in trial data that 2 senior reviewers had already cleared. She asked the question in meetings that made everyone else's contribution feel like rough draft material. She had a way of listening to your presentation with her arms folded and her head slightly tilted that made even confident people start second-guessing themselves mid-sentence. I respected her and found her exhausting in equal measure. We competed for the same lead positions, the same conference speaking slots, and eventually the same senior research director role that had opened up when our department head announced his retirement. That announcement landed on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, everyone in the department had quietly sorted themselves into 2 camps. Not openly. Research people are too careful for that. But you could tell by who ate lunch with whom. I told myself I didn't dislike her, that I was simply focused, that the friction between us was professional, productive, and entirely mutual. Then came the evening in the parking garage on a Thursday in late October. We had both stayed late finishing documentation for a trial that was submitting to the FDA the following morning. It was the kind of deadline that turns an office into a submarine, pressurized, airless, everyone moving with quiet urgency and not enough sleep. When I finally packed up and took the elevator down to the garage, it was past 9. The building was nearly empty. The garage was worse. Fluorescent lights, cold concrete, the smell of motor oil and exhaust that never quite leaves those places, no matter how much ventilation they add. I heard her before I saw her. Not crying. Just a sound that was trying not to be anything. A short exhale, tight and controlled. The kind you make when pain has surprised you and you're refusing to give it the satisfaction of a reaction. She was 3 rows over, between a silver SUV and a concrete pillar, one hand braced against the column, the other pressed to her chest. Her briefcase was on the ground. She had not dropped it dramatically. It sat beside her foot like she had set it down deliberately, which almost made it worse, like even then, she had been careful. I stopped. Every rational part of my brain said to give her privacy. We were not friends. We were barely civil after the Q3 review last month, when she had flagged the methodology inconsistency in my data that had taken me a week to correct and had cost me a very uncomfortable conversation with our supervisor. What happened between colleagues in parking garages after 9 on a Thursday was not my business. I walked over anyway. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. Her expression cycled through 3 things in less than 2 seconds. Surprise, something that might have been relief, then the careful professional composure she wore like a second skin. She almost had it back in place before I reached her. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hand was still pressed to her chest. "You're not." She looked at me like I had said something offensive, which I suppose I had by her personal standards. "It's a panic attack," she said, clipped. "It's not a medical emergency. I just need a minute." "Okay." I picked up her briefcase and set it on the hood of the SUV beside her. Then I leaned against the pillar across from her and said nothing. She stared at me. "You don't have to stand there." "I know." "This isn't." She stopped. Started again. "You don't need to witness this." "I'm not witnessing anything. I'm waiting for my car to warm up." "Your car is 2 rows over. The remote start has a long range." She would have argued under normal circumstances. I could see her wanting to. But the panic attack was still working on her, and her breathing was still too shallow, and whatever had brought it on was apparently still very much present. So instead of arguing, she looked away from me and pressed her back to the pillar and stared at the far wall of the garage. I stayed. After maybe 4 minutes, her breathing evened out. She picked up her briefcase from the SUV hood and looked at it for a second like she was confirming it was real. Then she looked at me. "You're going to be weird about this tomorrow," she said. "Probably not." "You have every reason to be. I also have every reason to go home and forget I saw anything. I'm choosing the second one." She studied me. The composure was mostly back, but something underneath it had shifted, and she knew I could tell, which meant the composure now had a new job, covering the fact that she was embarrassed someone had seen behind it. I knew that particular task. I performed it myself more times than I'd admitted to anyone. "My father's in Mass General," she said. Flat, like she was reading from a chart. "They admitted him this afternoon. Cardiac arrhythmia. Probably not dangerous, but probably is a sentence that does a lot of damage if you think about it long enough." "Yeah," I said. "It does." I had the FDA submission. I couldn't leave. She said it like she was still arguing the case to someone. "The trial closes in 14 hours. I couldn't leave." "I know." She looked at me. "Stop saying that." "What?" "I know. You keep saying it. You don't actually know." I thought about it. "You're right. I don't know what it's like to sit 3 miles from your father's hospital room and finish regulatory documentation because the deadline doesn't care about your family. I've never done that specific thing." Her jaw tightened, then released. "I've been doing it since 4 this afternoon. Every time I got close to leaving, there was another correction, another version to export. And I kept thinking..." She stopped. I waited. I kept thinking he would be fine by the time I got there, that by the time I left the building, they'd have him stable and comfortable, and I'd walk in and he'd tell me I overreacted by coming. A short, humorless breath. He'd say that. Exactly that. "That sounds like a man who raised you." Her eyes moved to me sharply. Then, despite herself, something that was almost a smile appeared and vanished. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that you both seem like people who work very hard at not needing anything." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He's 68. He was a high school chemistry teacher for 34 years. He coached cross-country. He fixed everything in our house himself because paying someone else felt like admitting the house was winning." A pause. "He called me today from the ER waiting room. Said he was fine. Said I shouldn't come. Said the doctors were probably being overly cautious." Her voice stayed controlled. That was somehow the most painful part. He was still wearing his coaching jacket. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say, and I had learned a long time ago that filling silence with words you can't back up is just noise with better intentions. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she said. "Because the garage is empty and I didn't leave." She looked at me. "That's a low bar." "It's the bar that was available." She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. And in the context of a fluorescent-lit parking garage at 9:15 on a Thursday, almost was more than enough. I drove her to the hospital. She argued for about 45 seconds, then looked at the keys in her hand, then at the elevator, and then at me, and said, "Okay," so quietly it was barely sound at all. The drive was mostly silent. The Longfellow Bridge at night, the Charles River black beneath it, the hospital district lit up on the other side. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the water and didn't say anything, which I appreciated. Silence with a purpose is different from silence with an apology inside it. At Mass General, I pulled up to the entrance and she reached for the door and then stopped. "You don't have to come in," she said. "I know." "Ethan." "Vivian." She turned to look at me. The hospital lights came through the windshield and caught the exhaustion in her face. She looked nothing like the woman who had quietly dismantled my Q3 methodology in a meeting of 12 people. She looked like a person who had been holding one too many things at once and had not yet put any of them down. "I'll come in for a bit," I said. "I'll stay out of the way. If you need to be alone, tell me." She nodded once. That was all. But she didn't argue, which, for Vivian, was its own kind of permission. Her father was on the 3rd floor in a monitored unit. His name was Gerald. He was a large man who looked like he had spent decades teaching rooms full of teenagers not to blow things up, which meant he had a natural air of authority that not even a hospital gown and cardiac leads could fully undermine. He was also, very clearly, furious at being horizontal. He looked at Vivian when she came in. and his expression did the thing parents' faces do, the thing where relief and irritation arrive at the same time, and you can't tell which one wins. "I told you not to come tonight," he said. "And yet." She set her briefcase down, walked to his bed, and looked at the monitor screen beside him like she was reviewing data. He looked past her to me in the doorway. "Who's this?" "Colleague." She didn't look up from the monitor. "He drove me." Gerald studied me the way men of a certain generation study people who show up uninvited, not hostile, evaluative. "You work with Viv?" "Same department. Ethan Calloway." He nodded once. "She beat you to anything yet?" "Several things." He seemed satisfied by that in a way I didn't entirely understand. "Sit down then. You're making the room feel busy." I sat. For the first 20 minutes, Vivian ran a quiet but thorough cross-examination of her father's doctors by proxy, asking Gerald about every piece of information they had given him until she had assembled a complete picture that satisfied her clinical brain. He answered with the patience of a man who knew this was how she loved people and had long since stopped trying to change it. But then his nurse came in to adjust his IV and said something routine about how arrhythmia events like his were often triggered by sustained stress over long periods. And something in Gerald's face shifted. "I know what triggered it," he said. Not to the nurse. To Vivian. The room went quiet in a different way. Dad. Your mother called me 4 times this week." He said it carefully, like he was placing each word in the right spot. "I didn't tell you because you were in the middle of this submission, but she called 4 times. Vivian went still. I had learned to read her stillness over 3 years of conference tables. This one was the kind that meant something had found a way through. "About what?" Her voice was even, professionally even. "About the house, the roof, the equity loan she took out last spring without." He stopped, reset. "It doesn't matter the details. I was managing it. I didn't want you distracted." "You were managing it by getting stressed enough to put yourself in cardiac monitoring." "I was managing it by not putting it on my daughter who has enough on her plate." His voice had gone rougher. "I buttoned my own problems for a long time before you were born, and I can still." "Dad." Her voice broke. "Just the once, please." He stopped. She sat on the edge of his bed, which, in that particular hospital room with those particular people, felt like a significant thing. Vivian did not sit on edges. She occupied spaces cleanly, fully, intentionally. Sitting on the edge was an admission that she was somewhere between inside and outside and hadn't decided which yet. "You don't have to manage everything alone," she said quietly. "I know that's what you taught me, but you don't actually have to do it yourself." Gerald looked at his daughter for a long moment. The monitor beeped steadily beside him. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rolled past. "Your mother and I," he started. Stopped. His hands, big working hands, rested on the blanket. One of them had a tremor in the first 2 fingers. Not dramatic. Just there. "We're not in a good place, Viv. Haven't been for a while. I didn't know how to tell you that without it becoming something you tried to fix." Vivian looked at his hands. I saw her see the tremor. She didn't look away. She didn't pretend she hadn't noticed. She reached out and covered his hand with both of hers, steadily, and held it there. Nobody said anything for a while. I looked at the window. The city outside, the parking structure across the street, a couple walking below with coffee cups. I was aware I was in a room where something real was happening, and I was exactly peripheral enough to it. Not invisible, not intrusive, just present in the way that sometimes matters without requiring explanation. After a while, Gerald looked over at me. "You stayed," he said. It wasn't an accusation, more like he was noting a fact about weather. "Yes, sir." "Why?" I thought about it honestly. I don't have a clean answer. "Give me the messy one then." "I've seen Vivian work for 3 years," I said. "She's the best researcher in our department and she doesn't need anyone to tell her that. But tonight she needed someone to drive and I had a car." Gerald considered that. Then he looked at his daughter who was looking at me. "He always this straightforward?" Gerald asked. "No," Vivian said. "Usually he's arguing with me about methodology." "That mean he's good at his job?" "Unfortunately." Gerald made a sound that might have been a laugh in a different context. Then he closed his eyes. Just to rest. The monitor kept its steady beat. But the conversation had cost him something. and the honesty had used the rest. Vivian and I stood in the corridor outside his room 20 minutes later, after a nurse came to check vitals and we stepped out to give her room. Vivian had her arms folded, not defensively, more like she needed to hold something. "He's been managing my mother's finances without telling me," she said quietly. "She makes impulsive decisions. She always has. He absorbs the consequences and pretends they're just life happening." Sounds like exhausting math. "He's been doing it for 35 years. She looked down the corridor. "And he still didn't want me to know. Because he knew I'd try to solve it." She paused. "He's not wrong. I would have. Would that be so bad?" She thought about it. "I don't know. It might have been worse. I have a tendency to optimize things that need to be felt, not fixed." That sentence landed quietly. I had never heard her say something like that about herself, not because she wasn't self-aware, she clearly was, but because that kind of self-awareness usually stayed internal with people like Vivian, the kind who has spent long enough being the competent one in every room that self-disclosure starts to feel like a liability. "My sister had a miscarriage 2 years ago," I said. I wasn't sure why I said it, except that she had given me something real, and it felt dishonest not to give something back. I was in a review meeting when she called. I saw her name on my phone, and I silenced it and finished the meeting. Vivian looked at me. She was okay. Eventually. But I didn't answer. And I've thought about it more times than I've told anyone. I looked at the wall across the hall. There's this version of professional you can become where you're so used to holding it together in rooms that you forget how to put things down. She was quiet for a moment. "Does she know you regret it?" "We talked about it later. She said she understood. I'm not sure understanding is the same as it being okay." Vivian nodded slowly. "No, it's not." We stood there for a moment, in the particular quiet of a hospital corridor at night. A place that hums with low urgency and the sound of ventilation systems and the distant rhythm of other people's difficult hours. "I came to work today knowing the submission was due," Vivian said. "And I knew that. And I did it anyway. And I don't know if that's discipline or if it's just the thing I hide behind when being present feels too risky. Probably both." She looked at me sideways. "You're supposed to say it was discipline. You'd know I was lying." She exhaled. Then she said, "I need to go back in." "Go." She started back toward the room, stopped with her hand on the doorframe. Turned halfway. "Ethan." "Yeah. Thank you for not making this professional." I didn't have a clean answer for that either, so I just nodded, and she went back in. I drove home at 11:30. Somewhere on the Mass Pike, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I didn't check it until I got home. It was a text from a number I had to search my contacts to place. Vivian's cell, which I had only because we were listed as emergency contacts for each other on the department travel policy. We had both noted the irony of that at the time and not mentioned it since. The text said, "He's stable, staying overnight for monitoring. Thank you for the drive." I replied, "Good, get some sleep." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then that's unlikely, but noted. The next morning at the office was strange in the specific way that follows an evening that changed something without announcing it. Vivian came in at 8:15, which was late for her, in clean clothes but with the particular careful quality around her eyes that comes from not enough sleep. She walked past my office, stopped, came back, and leaned in the doorway. "He goes home today," she said. "Monitoring was clean overnight. Good news. He wants to meet the person who drove me." His words. "Also good news." She looked at me for a second. "I told him you were my professional nemesis." "Accurate." He said that explained a lot. She paused. "He also said that's usually who you trust in a crisis." I looked up from my screen. She held my gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary for a hallway conversation. "I have the follow-up data report for the submission," she said, straightening. "Do you want to co-review? Your methodology is stronger on the pharmacokinetic modeling, and yours is better on adverse event categorization. So yes." "Yes." She nodded, started to go. Then she said without turning around, "I thought you were going to use last night against me. For the director role." "I know you thought that. Why didn't you?" I thought about the parking garage, her hand on the pillar, the briefcase set carefully on the ground. Because whatever happens with the director role doesn't mean as much if the way I get it is by holding someone's worst night over their head. She was quiet. Then, that's idealistic. Probably. I respect it anyway. She left. I turned back to my screen. Outside my window, Boston was gray and moving fast the way it does in November. Everyone bent slightly into the wind. I had a meeting in 40 minutes, and the data set that needed 3 more hours of review. Everything was completely normal, and also somehow different in a way I hadn't figured out the name for yet. The following weeks had the careful quality of 2 people who had seen each other clearly and were deciding what to do with that information. We still argued. The data gave us plenty to argue about. She still caught things I missed. I still pushed back on her interpretations when I thought they were too conservative. In a meeting on a Wednesday, she challenged my confidence interval on a secondary endpoint in front of the department head, and I spent 20 minutes demonstrating why she was wrong, and then 10 minutes conceding the one part where she wasn't. After the meeting, she fell into step beside me in the corridor. "You could have conceded that first," she said. "You could have raised it privately." I could have. She didn't sound apologetic, but she sounded like she'd thought about it. That was new. We got coffee from the 4th floor machine, which for once did not jam, and stood at the window with the kind of comfortable silence that has to be built over time and can't be faked. "My father wants to have dinner," she said. "He's recovering well. He's driving my mother insane by trying to fix things around the house he's not supposed to be lifting." That tracks. "He specifically requested you come." She set it into her coffee cup. I told him that was a strange request given the circumstances. He said the circumstances are exactly why. I looked at her profile. She kept looking out the window. "Is that something you want?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I don't fully know what I want from whatever this is." She said it plainly, which took something. Vivian did not offer uncertainty as easily as other people, but I know I don't want to pretend the parking garage didn't happen. And I don't know how to do that in an office. So dinner. If you're willing. I'm willing. She nodded once. Efficient. Then she finished her coffee and went back to her office. I stood at the window for another minute watching the city. Gerald and Vivian's mother, a sharp-eyed woman named Frances who had opinions about everything and kept them organized like a card catalog, lived in Brookline in a house that smelled like coffee and old books, and whatever Frances had been baking since apparently 5 in the morning. The front hallway had family photos, school pictures, a framed newspaper clipping from when Gerald's cross-country team won their district meet in 2003. Vivian at what must have been 11, holding a science fair ribbon, standing very straight. Gerald met me at the door in a cardigan and the expression of a man who had fully recovered his authority and was relieved about it. "You're taller than I expected," he said. I'm not sure how to respond to that. "Don't. Come in." Frances took my coat, gave me a once-over that was somehow both warm and extremely thorough, and said, "Vivian said you drove her to the hospital. You didn't have to do that." "I know." "She also said you didn't make it strange." "I tried not to." Frances looked at her daughter, who was hanging up her own coat with practiced calm. "I like him," she said to Vivian, as if I wasn't standing 3 feet away. "You just met him," Vivian said. 30 years of teaching high school volunteers at the ER, Frances said. "I can read people." Then she went to check on whatever was in the oven and left Gerald and me standing in the hallway together. Gerald studied me for a moment. Then he said, "She doesn't ask people for things." "I know." "She didn't ask you, technically. You just stayed." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Her whole life. She came home from school and made herself not need homework, help, because she thought needing help was the same as failing. I used to leave her door cracked when she was working late on projects, just to be close in case." He looked at the photographs on the wall. "She never asked me to. She just let me." I didn't say anything. There are things you're allowed to be told and things you're supposed to figure out yourself. And I was pretty sure this was both. Dinner was loud in the good way. Frances had opinions about the pharmaceutical industry. Gerald asked me 11 very specific questions about research ethics disguised as casual conversation, and Vivian argued with her father about 3 different things before the main course, all of them substantive, all of them clearly a form of love. At one point, Gerald reached across the table for the bread basket and his hand shook enough that he knocked it sideways. Vivian reached over without hesitating and caught it and set it right and kept talking about whatever she'd been saying without pausing, without drawing attention, without making it anything. He looked at her hand on the basket, then at me. I gave him nothing back. Not because I hadn't seen it, because some things don't need to be received loudly. After dinner, Francis disappeared into the kitchen with practiced insistence, and Gerald fell asleep in his chair with a book open on his lap within 15 minutes, which Vivian said was the best sign that he was actually recovering. We sat on the back porch, in the cold, because the house was warm and the air outside felt like something to stand in for a minute. "Your mother is terrifying," I said. She'd take that as a compliment. She should. Vivian had a mug of tea and looked out at the yard. Dead grass, a garden put to sleep for winter, a maple that was probably magnificent in October. "He's going to need changes," she said. "The stress management, the finances with my mother, physical activity that isn't trying to fix gutters." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "He's going to hate every part of it. He's going to do it because you ask him to." She looked at me. "You don't know that. I watched him watch you at dinner. He's going to do it." She was quiet. Then, softly, "I spent so long trying to be someone he'd be proud of that I forgot I could also just be someone he talks to." She said it without drama, which made it heavier than drama would have. Like tonight. That was just dinner, and it was the most useful thing I've done all month. The maple stood in the yard, bare and patient. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the director role." "Me too. If it goes one way or the other." "It won't change what happened in the parking garage," I said. She looked at me. "I was going to say I want us to be honest about how we're each doing in the process, not strategic, just honest." "I can do that." "I know you can. That's what makes it complicated." She looked back at the yard. "You're not who I thought you were 3 years ago. Neither are you." "Is that good?" I thought about the parking garage and the hospital corridor, and the bread basket and dinner with her parents. About the version of Vivian who had spent 3 years being the most competent person in every room, and the version who pressed her hands around her father's to keep it steady. "Yeah," I said. "It's good." She looked at me for a moment in that particular way she had, assessing, but not coldly. The same way she read data she wasn't sure how to categorize yet. Then she turned back toward the yard. "Don't be graceful about this," she said quietly. "About what?" "Whatever's happening. The thing where you're patient and reasonable and make it easy for me to avoid saying the actual thing." I turned toward her. "What's the actual thing?" She kept looking at the yard. "I don't want to go back to the way things were." "Then don't." She looked at me. "That's not an answer. It's the one I have right now." I shifted on the porch step to face her more fully. "I don't know exactly what this is yet, but I don't want to go back to what it was before either. And that's honest, even if it's not a plan." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she exhaled. And the thing she had been carrying, the careful managed composure that she wore even on back porches in the cold with her tea, it didn't disappear, but it loosened. Just slightly. Just enough. "Okay," she said. "Okay." The porch light cast everything a pale yellow. Down the street, someone's dog was barking at something that probably wasn't there. Inside, Francis could be heard reorganizing the kitchen with the efficiency of a woman who finds movement clarifying. Vivian took a sip of her tea. "I'm going to beat you to the director role." "You might." "I will. Then I'll be gracious about it, and you'll find that insufferable." Deeply. She almost smiled. "Good." What followed was not simple, and I won't pretend it was. The director process stretched another 2 months. We were both serious candidates. There were panels, presentations, third-party reviews of our respective research portfolios. In every session, Vivian was exceptional, measured, specific, prepared in the way that suggests the preparation was the smallest part of the competence. I gave everything I had and knew it might not be enough. It wasn't, in the end. She got the role, which was announced on a February Tuesday, and I found out standing in my office with an email on my screen and a very odd feeling in my chest that turned out, on closer inspection, not to be resentment. I walked to her office. She was on the phone and she saw me through the glass and held one finger up. I waited. When she hung up, she came to the door. I heard, I said. She searched my face for something. I let her find whatever was actually there. You're not, she stopped. No, I meant it. She looked at me a beat longer. Then, you should have pushed harder on the pharmacokinetic presentation. I know, I overthought the framing. Yes. A pause. For what it's worth, the panel said it was close. Close is information. Her jaw shifted slightly. The almost smile. That's an annoyingly healthy response. I'm full of those. She was quiet. Then she said, I want you on my team. Officially. Expanded research lead on Bradfield. Bradfield was our biggest incoming trial. A phase 3 with 3 years of runway and more complexity than anything the department had handled in a decade. You'd have direct input on methodology, team structure, publication strategy. I looked at her. You're offering me a role. I'm asking if you want it. She said it carefully. You don't have to. I want it. She nodded once. Professional. But her shoulders settled in a way that told me the answer mattered more than the nod suggested. Things were declared properly after that. HR notified once the reporting structure was reviewed and confirmed clean, which involved a form, a meeting with our department head, and a 30-minute conversation about professional boundaries that we both handled with the particular gravity of people who have been professional long enough to know what professionalism is actually protecting. After that meeting, Vivian said, standing in the elevator going back to the 4th floor, that was the least romantic administrative experience of my life. But necessary. Completely necessary. She looked at the elevator doors. My father is going to say, I told you so. What did he tell you? That the parking garage was already the answer. She said it without looking at me. He said I only ask people to stay when I already know whether I want them to. The elevator opened. We stepped into the 4th floor hallway. The coffee machine, mercifully, was not jammed. Was he right? I asked. She picked up her coffee cup from the counter and looked at me with the clear, unhurried assessment she used for things she had already decided. Yes, she said. Then she went back to her office and I went back to mine, and we argued productively for the rest of the afternoon about Bradfield's enrollment timeline. 3 years later, we left the firm. Not because of each other. Because we had spent enough time watching institutional inertia dress itself up as caution, and we were tired of it. Restarted a small research consulting practice in Cambridge. 4 people, good data systems, a client list we'd built from relationships, and a shared intolerance for research that prioritizes optics over rigor. Our first office had exposed brick, which Vivian said was charming, and I said was a renovation deferred, and we were both right. We argued about it 3 times and then hung a whiteboard over the worst section and moved on. Gerald came to see the office on the day we signed the lease. He stood in the middle of the room with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked around at the exposed brick and the mismatched furniture and the whiteboard with our first client timeline already written on it in Vivian's precise handwriting. It's ugly, he said. Dad, it looks like work. He nodded once, satisfied. That's better. He has good months and harder ones now. The Parkinson's has not progressed the way he feared it would in those early days. But it hasn't gone backwards either. He takes his medication. He has a physical therapist named Marco who he pretends to find insufferable and has clearly decided is a fixture. He no longer fixes the gutters himself, which took 2 years of convincing and 1 near fall that nobody discusses. The first time he let me help him with his jacket. A Sunday in winter, standing in the hallway of the Brookline house, his hands not cooperating with the buttons. He looked at me with the expression of a man conducting a final assessment. You know what you're doing, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I'm learning, I said. He studied me for another second. Then he said, good enough, and let me help him. Vivian and I got married in the fall, in the backyard of the Brookline house under the maple that had been bare and patient the first night I sat on that porch. Frances cried from the first minute and claimed she had allergies. Gerald stood straight throughout the whole thing, jacket buttoned. When people ask how we got together, I usually say she had a panic attack in a parking garage, and I happen to have a car. Vivian says I make it sound smaller than it was. She's right. She usually is. The truth is that I fell in love with my work rival not because she had no weaknesses, but because one night she let me see one, and then came to work the next day anyway, sharp and impossible and entirely herself, and I realized that the woman behind the composure and the woman who wore it were the same person, and that person was more than I had allowed myself to see. She still catches things I miss. I still push back when she's too cautious. The arguments are better now because the stakes are cleaner and neither of us is trying to win by making the other small. Last week, she came home from a client call that had gone badly and stood in the kitchen looking at nothing for a minute. I made coffee, set a cup beside her, didn't ask. After a while, she wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at me and said, "I hate when I'm the one who needs a minute." I know. Don't say I know. I know you hate when I say that. She looked at me. Then she laughed. The real one, not the professional almost smile. The one that belongs to the back porch and the parking garage and everything since. That's the one I fell in love with. I think about the parking garage a lot. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. Not really. A woman with her hand on a concrete pillar, a briefcase set carefully on the ground. The sound of someone trying not to need anything. What I remember most is that I almost kept walking. And I think that's the part we're sitting with. Because the decision that changed everything wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a speech or a plan. It was just staying. Choosing not to use someone's worst moment as a reason to walk faster. I spent 3 years competing with Vivian and telling myself that's all it was. Competition. Professional friction. The useful kind that makes you sharper. And some of it was. But some of it was also me keeping a careful distance from anyone who might actually be able to see what I was doing. Because people who are that good at their jobs tend to see through the parts you've rehearsed. The thing about integrity, the real kind, not the kind you perform in meetings, is that it shows up in moments nobody's watching. There was no audience in that garage. No one was going to know whether I stopped or kept walking. And that's exactly why it mattered. You find out what you actually are in the moments that don't count toward anything. Vivian taught me something about that too. Though she'd probably argue she didn't teach me anything deliberately, she is one of the most genuinely intelligent people I've ever worked alongside. Not just technically, but in the way she understands what's actually happening in a room, what a situation requires, what other people need even when they won't say it. And watching her that night, watching someone that capable quietly fall apart in a parking garage because she'd been holding too many things at once, made me understand that intelligence without honesty is just performance. She had spent years being the most prepared person in every room, but the moment she stopped managing and just said, "My father's in the hospital and I've been sitting 3 miles away finishing regulatory paperwork," that was the most honest and therefore the most powerful thing I'd ever seen her do. There's a version of strength that's really just endurance dressed up to look like control. Gerald understood that. He had spent 35 years absorbing consequences quietly, managing everything so his family didn't have to, and his heart finally sent him a very direct message about the cost. What I watched happen in that hospital room, Vivian covering his shaking hand with both of hers and not making anything of it, that wasn't weakness. That was the harder thing. Staying present with something you can't fix takes more out of you than solving it does. The three of us, in different ways, had to learn that same lesson. That resilience isn't the refusal to need. It's the willingness to keep going honestly. To show up to work the next morning after you've cried in a parking garage. To let someone help you with your jacket when your hands won't cooperate. To say, "I don't want to go back to the way things were" out loud. Even when you don't have a clean answer for what comes next. I didn't stay in that garage because I was trying to win anything. I stayed because it was the right thing, and I happened to still be there. But that choice set off everything that followed. The hospital, her father, the dinner table, the years after. Small decisions made in private have a way of becoming the whole story eventually. I'm glad I didn't keep walking.